Here we are, we're in my sewing corner for my very special edition video. You can see the hair has been refreshed and this is my Pride video. Every year I sew something specifically for Pride. Last year I did a day dress, but typically I do something a little bit more big and gown-like, which is what we're doing today. I bought this really gorgeous graffiti printed silk while I was in Houston, Texas, and I thought it would make the perfect dress for Pride. It's so colorful, it's like rainbow. I love this fabric, I think it's great. My Pride make is usually one of my favorite makes. As a lesbian, Actually, it's so funny. I feel like I actually go out very little during Pride because, you know, when you're gay, you're always gay. Yes, this will be my gown for Pride. By gown, I mean, I'll probably wear it as a day dress, but it is technically supposed to be a gown. I'm going to be using this pattern here. This is a Lady Marlowe pattern, and it features just kind of this like ruched side that would be really pretty. I was looking for something essentially that wouldn't cut apart the graffiti too much. So I was looking for something that didn't have that many pieces. I mean, this still has a lot of pieces, hi spooky, but not in the same way that others have pieces. So my plan is to do the big bow. This is hopefully going to be a fun pattern. Now I see it's 4057-S shorter length. I don't know what that means, but I'm short, so that hopefully will work for me. I've never seen that notation on the pattern before. We'll figure it out. We'll roll with the punches. This is sheer, as you can see. I am going to be making a slip for it. My goal is to make the dress first, and then I'll make the slip after to see, because I'm not quite sure what the slip need is here. I might not do like a full length slip. I might do a shorter slip. So yeah, I'm first going to get the gown done, and then we're going to take a look at the slip. So that is the plan for today. Yeah, I can't wait to get this done. Have it in my closet for the summer, because yes, my plan, while this is technically a gown, is to incorporate this into my everyday wardrobe. And I think because I'm using a chiffon that's pretty matte and I just feel like it's kind of more casual in print, I will be able to use this gown in my everyday life. Slash, I dress a little over the top anyway, so it's probably fine. Let's hop to it. Since this is a reproduction pattern, I unfortunately have to cut out all of the paper pattern pieces, which is always quite a bit of work. But luckily, this pattern actually doesn't have that many pieces because it basically just has like a front and back and some facing pieces. I am starting by just cutting out, this is the front piece, I only need one. It's a giant piece, and I do plan on doing a seam to get the fullness of the skirt correct, which you can see there when it kind of drops off. And typically this is where I do my plug for my Patreon, but for Pride Month I always do something a little different. I am fundraising for Point of Pride as part of this video. You can go over to my Ko-fi and send money marked for Point of Pride, and I will go in and I will donate through my benefits at work, which will allow me to double the donation. I love doing this each year. It's great that I can double people's dollars. I can double my own dollars. It's something I really appreciate about my job. So if supporting Point of Pride, which provides financial aid and direct support of trans folks who need health and wellness care. So this is something that I'm always very passionate about. It is so hard to afford care, and it is life-saving to have that care. So yes, this is my plug for that. Again, you can go over to my Ko-fi, designate it Point of Pride, and then I will post my receipt probably at the end of June or mid-July. I like to usually give this video a couple weeks to stew before putting in my donation, but I will make sure you guys know that I do donate it. And after cutting out this fabric, I am letting it hang overnight, and then I'm going to just trim where it kind of fell. This is always helpful to do at the beginning to try to get a straighter hem, especially on something like a silk chiffon, which just tends to stretch, especially with how much is on the bias here. Also, Spooky is the darn cutest little cat here. What a silly goose. She is like me and has a real taste for expensive fabrics, because silk is her favorite to play in. I am going to start with the back because it just feels a little less daunting because the steps aren't normal. So I'm starting here by putting in the darts in the back. The back does have a bit of like a sweetheart back, for lack of better term. And then this is one of those bodices that you kind of like top stitch down. So I'm putting in some basting stitches here to mark the stitching line that I will actually fold it up to, which this will also, you can see me iron here, and the stitching line also has the benefit of making it so I can cut a little deeper with a little less anxiety here. And then I'm going to match the curve of the back of the gown here. I am going to be basically putting in enough pins to ease this. This is not unlike easing a sleeve in. First of all, of course, I have to have room for my butt in this, but in general, I don't know if it's because the piece stretched or what exactly it was, but I definitely had to just really do a lot of easing work on this. And even with my best easing, I still had a little bit of an overhang, so I'm just going to trim that off and hope for the best. And you can see the top stitching here as well too. From there, I'm going to sew up the center back seam. What you see me here doing is I am moving from where the zipper is going to go from basting stitch to then, of course, you know, an actual sewing stitch for the rest of the down the back of this dress. And this is a pretty tightly woven chiffon, so I did decide to finish this using pinking. People will always disagree with me on this, and you're totally allowed to do so, but I've worked with a lot of silk, and silk I find doesn't fray particularly bad. However, if you work with a poly chiffon, it will definitely shred and fray crazily. But yeah, I just find in general for me, silk doesn't fray. Sometimes I would French seam this, but in this case I'm not, because I'll have a lining, so it also won't be rubbing against my skin. It'll be rubbing against a slicker fabric. And for where that zipper is, I am now just going to pull out that basting stitch so I can have an open back where I can fit in the zipper. And then here I'm actually sewing the zipper in. I'm doing a simple lapped zipper here. This is my preference. I like a lapped zipper, but obviously you do you on what you like. I understand why people love kind of more the center instead of like a single lap, but I'm not a good enough, consistent enough, straight enough sewer to have anything but just a simple placket. With the back done, I can now move to the front, and what I'm doing here is again just trying to even out that hem a little bit, because of course I know that there's a lot of bias happening here. So I'm going to overlay it, and then I'll just cut off whatever little extra bits that I need to cut off here for this to continue to work. For the flow of the front of the dress, it has me doing some little tuck pleats here. These are going to be top stitched, which is not my particularly favorite look, but in theory the bow should block all of this off. So I am of course just following the instructions on this, so that way the dress falls correctly. I am also running the gathering stitches up the side here. That is what's going to create the ruched side detail. And one of the pleats I was trying to make didn't work very well, so I actually unpicked it and I'm going to restructure it here. But with that, I'm going to just first do the front bodice part of the lining. I was going back and forth on how I wanted to do this lining overall, and I think I've concluded that I want to sew both things into the waist seam to stabilize the silk and make sure that the silk itself is not taking too much weight. So here what I'm first doing is there were lining pieces specifically for this bodice with these really big darts in them, so I am going to sew these darts. When working with these types of fabrics, tension is the name of the game, and you can see here my tension isn't quite right. I do a lot of tension adjustments while I work on fabrics like these. So this is not really my real lining piece. What you see me doing is I'm just basting it up at the top because I'm going to have a second lining piece that is actually going to clean everything up. This is a stabilizer that I'm going to actually ruche the body of this dress to. So I am just basting it all together right here. And this piece here is what's key in keeping the front of this dress from not having to have a waist seam. Here you can see me actually now gathering it. I'm following all of the markings and stuff and trying to keep things super even. The gathering here is going to be the make or break it for the dress. So we're going to move with that in mind and try to get everything working in our favor here. And once I felt good about the ruching I got, I am now going to sew the whole side seam all the way down. A bit nerve-wracking, but feeling very excited as well too. And now I'm working on the straps. These are pretty straightforward and I love how thick they are. And I'm just working on turning this, and then I'm going to press them before basting them on the back so I can try on this dress and pin them to the front to figure out the length of these. With the shell of the dress done, it's finally time for me to think about the inner layers. I had initially planned on doing a slip because I think it's more versatile and I can use it with other pieces and kind of mix and match. But the more I was looking at this dress, the more I thought that I actually needed to have a full-on lining here. I think this is going to give the dress better longevity than if it was just the silk chiffon kind of holding on to itself, and it'll give better stability. I think I'll get better finishes. I just decided that it was best across the board to go with this. So yeah, I'm going to cut out a lining. However, because this dress didn't plan on having a lining, as in like the pattern pieces didn't, I am going to cut the back pieces twice because the front piece is obviously not great for a lining shape. And since it'll be under the skirt, it's okay if there's a center seam in the front, and I'll just make it big enough that I can like tuck it or do whatever I need to do to make it fit into the waistline, since I'm going a little bit off script and a little bit rogue here. So I'm going to cut the lining shorter, so I've actually made a fold here to do that. I don't want the lining poking out from the dress, and I'm not planning on doing the same bias cut falling before, so it will be more prone to stretch, and I would like to not have to redo it in the future. So yeah, we're just gonna go a little bit short. I think we went about 3 inches shorter here. First, we're just gonna start by getting the bodice pieces together, and I have, like I said, the second weird bodice lining essentially here. I also have the back here, and I remembered after doing the dart, of course, that I actually do want to have interfacing here because silk chiffon, especially with a rayon Bemberg, needs to have a little bit more structure. So we are putting in my lighter weight wall wax interfacing here. It's just going to help this dress hold its structure long term. And then I am just real quick stitching these pieces together. And here what you see me doing with unpicking is I have tried on the dress, and I have now actually pinned it tighter. It needed a lot of tightening around the bust area to make sure the ruching works correctly. So I'm just unpicking the other parts of the seam so that way I can make sure I can press this really, really well. I haven't had to take in a dress for a minute, but also I've not been wanting my clothing to fit that tight. But I just know this dress will look its best if it's a little bit tighter. So I am making sure to unpick things here, and then I am also pulling out gathering stitches at this point. And here you can see, again, that kind of like half bodice situation here, which will become really important because this is where I'm going to attach the lining in the front to, because there's no waist seam to support it. And I don't obviously want to add a waist seam to the front at all. So very important. And then I am just pressing the side seams open now that I'm happy with the fit of this dress. It'll be nice that I have the ability to widen this dress should I ever need to. And then here I am pinning the lining top bodice to the top of the dress as well. And after sewing those layers together, I am then going to make sure I am understitching, because again, it is so important anywhere we can, we add these guided fold lines for a fabric that is as flimsy as a chiffon. I am then going to work on assembling the skirt pieces of the lining. And what you see me doing here is removing the basting stitches I put in to close this up where the zipper is, to just sew down each of the sides of the zipper so that way we'll be nice and clean. And then here I'm just sewing the front sides, the back sides, and all of that good stuff again on that skirt. And then on the front, like I said, I am pinning right sides together, the structure piece of the bodice that's not a lining. And then for the back skirt, I am just pinning that into the existing seam and also all the way around that to again get everything structurally held where the silk itself is not actually holding it, but it's the rayon layer up above, because the silk chiffon is just not meant to really hold any weight, right? And you can see what I actually mean right here when I'm sewing this. So here I am sewing again that weird structural lining piece that's not the real bodice lining, and then quickly once I go over the side seam, you'll see that I am sewing this to, I mean, I am technically still sewing it to the silk, but it's the silk above the seam line that's actually holding the weight of the skirt, because again, there should not be additional weight put on like a bodice of silk. So yeah, a little different. This was a bit interesting to figure out for me, but this is why I love sewing, is it is ultimately a very interesting thing. And here I'm going to put my label real quick before figuring out the rest of this. I feel like I've been doing my label by hand a lot recently because I keep forgetting to put it in during the process. But to cover all of my various messy things, including like the zippers and the waist seams, I'm now going to, I have already like folded and pressed the lining here, and now I'm just gonna tack it down all the way around the back zipper, through the waist, all the way then back to the other back zipper. This will give a really clean finish where you again can't see any of my mistakes, and again is why one of the reasons I was okay with pinking this one instead of French seaming it, is because everything's hidden by the lining. I am down to the last finishing details. I bought some ribbon that was 8 inches wide, that was I think for like weddings or whatever, and it was really ugly and poor quality and like very polyester-y, and the idea of putting it on this beautiful gown made me sad. So I decided to use the rest of the lining and cut like a big 8-inch wide bias cut situation here to make the bow. That does mean there will be seams in the bow. There was no way around it, but I just couldn't again bear to use that cheap ugly polyester ribbon that I bought, which to be clear, I'm not calling all polyester ugly. I think polyester has its time and its place. It's just it looked very different than the rest of the quality of the fabric for this gown. And here I'm going to do kind of like a faux felled seam to cover up the where I had to like sew the bias part of this fabric together. And then I am trying a new stitch for me. I think it's a handkerchief hem, which is like a double roll done by hand. I wanted this to still feel like a ribbon, and luckily like rayon feels very double-sided. That meant I needed my seaming and hemming technique to definitely not just be a straight up double turn hem with a lot of stitching. That would have really, for me, impacted the way this would have looked long term. So I tried a new stitch and it was quite delightful actually. This then again goes into hand sewing for too long. However, when you're hand sewing rayon, so much easier than denim. So it ended up being actually pretty okay on my hands. As well as the bow, kind of the last finishing touch I have is the hem. So what I did is I asked a friend to level out the hem through pins, and then I'm going to mark below where they leveled out the hem for me. I used one of those hem tools that like comes on the ruler and just like kind of twirled in a circle, and my friend put pins in it. And now I'm actually doing those markings, and I'm gonna cut it where I mark it, which will give me room for a double turn hem to even out this hem hopefully, because she's a bit of a mess, not gonna lie. There were parts of this that was like 8 to 9 inches longer than other parts, so it had gotten a little wild. And the tension looks really funky here. I probably could have loosened my tension a tad looking at this, but it ended up pressing out fine, so it's kind of whatever. But I am, like I said, double turn hemming this. And I also did a double turn hem on my lining, although I would say I did a little bit less nice of a job on this because hopefully no one will see it except for me. I'm now using my best retail skills to try to tie a cute looking bow. I think the like charm of the bow on this is that it's not super stiff and that it's very liquid, but that does mean I had to tie it a few times to get it to look exactly right. And then after trying on the dress and pinning the bow where I wanted it, I am now going to tack it in place. This does cover those top stitched pleats that I was not loving, so I'm very excited about that. And again, when we talk structural integrity, I don't actually want to hang this dress by the straps of this. That is for sure gonna pull them down and kind of really stretch out this dress. So I am adding in just some rayon binding here for me to actually hang it by, and I'm anchoring that down in the waist, which does feel obnoxious. However, it is the most secure point of the dress, and my goal when I make something is for it to last a long time and be very like structurally sound, because I have dealt with over the years so many vintage pieces of clothing that I love that it wasn't really thought how long-term things would happen to it, depending on how you cared for it. So I try to make my clothes as easy to care for as possible by doing little tricks like this. But with that, I have finished this dress. I can't wait for you to see it, and we are ready for the reveal. All right, you have seen the reveal. I hope you enjoyed. Slightly different ambiance than I was attending. I heard that by the Expedia headquarters, there was a beach of lupine. So I went to check it out. I love lupine, it's one of my favorite flowers, and it was indeed a lot of lupine, but wild lupine is definitely, at least there, a lot less colorful. So I was hoping for a big colorful background, got a kind of gloomy background, but I still think it was beautiful nonetheless. With that, we're gonna hop into all of the final things. So we're gonna talk through cost breakdown, final thoughts on the project, and then hope helps. So let's hop to it. Oh my goodness. Hi, little monster. Yeah, okay. Back down you go. Or you can stay, whatever you're feeling, but I have to be able to access my paper. Alrighty, I have my budget. Spooky's really rounding things up. You can see her little tail right here. First disclaimer, this was really expensive fabric. I think this is the most expensive by yard fabric in my collection. So disclaimer, this is an expensive dress. So I spent $68.17 on the lining. At Universal Fabrics, I actually found their Bemberg to be quite reasonably priced, quite competitive compared to others in the industry, at least here on the West Coast. Oh, hi, baby girl. Yeah, you're so cute. I know, I just got home. And then for the silk was expensive. Modern print silk usually is. Also from Universal Fabrics, which I thought their silk prices were fair for the quality of the silk. I spent $297.36 on the silk. I believe it was about $80 a yard, something like that. So yes, very expensive. For me, very worth it. I don't buy clothes, I buy fabric. So I'm happy with it because I think it being silk is part of why I really love wearing it, which I'll talk about later. But yeah, so that brings my fabric total to $365.53. A fully lined fully natural fiber dress will cost money when you're talking about chiffons and like lightweight fabrics. For the Notion's pretty affordable, $5.02. And then the pattern, this was a reproduction. I spent $23.95 on this pattern. That brings my supply cost to $394.50. All things considered, it's not really saving money. If I did my research, I think I could probably build a case that this is still less than if you bought a fully silk, fully rayon, high quality couture dress from somebody. This is a good deal, but yes, this is an expensive piece. I always feel weird when I make really expensive pieces, but I also want to be really honest about it because I think not enough people are transparent in the price of what their crafts and their projects cost. And I think it's important to be transparent, and of course you could do this way more affordably, right? Instead of silk, you could get a polyester chiffon, and then you could also line it with a polyester lining instead of a Bemberg rayon. There are ways to absolutely cut your costs. Also, you could use a less expensive pattern. There's all sorts of things you can do to cut costs. You definitely don't need to spend this to sew. For me, if I'm going to put in the time investment, I like to put in a certain level of investment into the things that I actually sew with, and I know this dress is gonna last a really long time in my wardrobe because it fits really well and is really comfy, and I can take it both dressy and casual depending on my mood. For labor, which we also talk about on this channel, I spent an hour and a half cutting out the pieces. That's mainly because I had to cut it twice, right? Because I had to cut the lining, which this dress originally did not have a lining. I kind of rigged all of that. Sewing wise, I spent 8 hours and 30 minutes. Again, sewing basically everything twice. Then hand sewing was 3 hours and 30 minutes. If I was able to find the wide ribbon I needed, I could have not spent that much time sewing. I couldn't find a ribbon that I liked for that price, so I ended up doing all of that by hand, which brings us to labor time of 13 hours and 30 minutes to make this dress. Honestly, doesn't feel too bad to me because, I don't know, I just came out of a dress that took a lot longer and I'm about to go into a dress that's gonna take longer, so I feel pretty okay with that. Here we talk about a living wage. I live in Seattle, so I price at the living wage, which is what I would charge if somebody was to ask me to sew a project for them, to pay myself a living wage where I could, you know, afford to exist as a skilled laborer here in Seattle. So I do that at $51. So I'm gonna multiply that $51 by 13 hours and 30 minutes, and that brings me to a labor total of $688.50. That brings a grand total, hi kiddo, of $1,083. Even. How often do we get an even number here? I have to say this was an expensive dress. Again, these type of gown projects that I do are always on the more expensive side just because you need a lot more to make a gown than you do like a day dress. And then of course, like I said, I bought modern, really nice silk. In general, I find the more modern and relevant prints and silk feels, the more expensive the silk often is. I don't know, I don't feel like the price for this was completely out of the realm of what a garment should cost if we actually paid people fair, like living wage for things, and if we were using natural high-end fibers, right? Silk, again, is not for everyday garment. It's a specialty fabric. I don't sew with silk tons and tons because it is a specialty fabric and it is priced like a specialty fabric. But we're gonna move on to talking about the project itself. I have it sitting right here. I really like wearing this dress. I wore this dress both to work. I actually wear it with this turtleneck underneath it for a little bit more coverage, although I will say I would definitely wear this dress to work as is. I don't think it is too revealing for where I work. I just wore it with a turtleneck because it was still chilly, and I wanted to test wear this for a day and see if it was comfortable or not, or what the scoop was on it. And then I also actually ended up wearing this a day later when it was really hot out to a sewing event that I went to. It was Seattle Sew's 4th birthday, and it was very fun. This wears like a dream. So comfortable. I could eat as much as I wanted. It never felt tight. There's something about the lines of this dress that just never feel tight or constricting. This is the type of dress I love to wear because you don't feel like you're wearing clothes when you wear it. It's just so light, but you also at the same time feel like you're wearing a fabulous outfit. The way it just like moves and flows and feels, I feel gorgeous in this piece, and that is always the hope when you make something like this. I wasn't sure about it at first when I tried it on without the bow on it because I wasn't loving the way the pleats look, but one of the points of the bow is to cover the pleats that are top stitched. And I think that was really successful. The one thing that I will say is I felt like the pattern imagery really emphasized a lot of gathering, and to me, this did not actually have as much gathering. So in the future, I might adjust the pattern to add even more gathering and kind of ruchiness here. I was also worried because these aren't like stitched in place and are kind of random gathers that I would feel kind of like frumpy or like droopy in this, and I did not find that to be the case at all either. I felt like everything sat really well on me, so I'm pretty pleased with this across the board. I don't think this is going to be an everyday dress purely because it's silk and that is a bit high risk. I did pre-wash this, so it will be fine being washed again, but my goal with silk is to wash it as little as possible. So this won't become like an everyday dress, even though for me it's definitely everyday oriented or styled. And again, I think this dress like moves itself really well across the dressiness spectrum. I think the print makes it a little bit more casual, but if I like put the right accessories with it, I could really jazz this up. I actually have enough fabric left over that I think I'm going to be able to make a little silk blouse of the leftover fabric, which I'm very excited about. I think I'm going to make, I have like a bunch of those bow tie blouses, and I think I have just enough fabric to do that with this, which I'm really excited to have 2 pieces from this print because this is, ooh. This might be my favorite print I've ever sewn because it's just so unique, and the fact that it's silk is actually kind of shocking. I just feel like you don't see silk in this type of print ever. I just adore this piece across the board. I have very little to no complaints about it. The only complaint I have is when I leveled the hem, or I guess had my friend help me level the hem. Somehow it ended up a little bit longer in the front than the rest of the dress, so I am gonna go back. And in general, I would say I think it's a smidge too long, so I think I'm just gonna bring it up by an inch, and I think that will help with, again, my wearableness. I just didn't want to get it too short from the get-go because I often end up with kind of these T mid-calf lengths, and I wanted this to like very much kind of cover my shoes. So like a full length gown. And I think I can do that, but yeah, I think I just need to take another stab at leveling out the hem. And there's also a chance that we leveled the hem, and then when this hung for a week, the hem dropped again, right? I did let it hang for over 24 hours, but sometimes that's not enough. And also you guys saw me recut the fabric after letting it hang for 24 hours. So I did my best to mitigate that, but that's just inevitable with these types of dresses, especially something with so much ruching is just gonna be cut a little bit weird on grain. So you're gonna have some drooping. So I need to go back and fix that. I can wear this with a bra, without a bra. I thought it worked great with a turtleneck underneath it, which also speaks to how much room I have underneath this. So I also have room to grow in this dress, which we love. 10 out of 10. We have a very successful Pride dress. I can't wait. I don't know yet what I'm doing for Pride, but I can't wait to wear it to Pride. But yeah, that is it on this dress. We are gonna hop over to Hope Helps. I had hoped to find specific articles about current events in the queer community that give me hope, and there are so many. I want to be clear, there are so many that give me hope of different articles, different things I've seen in the news, but I wanted to keep kind of general, not because there aren't specifics to celebrate, but because there's so much to celebrate. Pride's important to me for so many reasons. I did not ever get to go to Pride growing up. Again, I feel like I say this all the time, I grew up in a place that it was not okay to be queer. I grew up in a family where I think it would have been very hard to come out when I still lived in my parents' home. They are very accepting and loving of who I am now, but I think it would have been different and much worse in my teens. I grew up in a fairly conservative church that preached against homosexuality, and I also was definitely at a school where I was bullied for it. And I remember like debating kids in class about queerness being acceptable. Like, it was not great. I had friends sent to conversion camps. Being queer was really, really hard where I was growing up. And one of the articles, I'm just gonna drop a link with a ton of good LGBTQ news, but one of the articles I was reading, which I'll call out specifically, it talks about Oklahoma's first Pride in '85. And I really loved reading this article because I think it summarizes my thoughts about why I feel hopeful as a queer person and for Pride. It just spoke to how the first Pride event, it was like 10 people, and some of them wore like paper bags on their heads in fear of retribution for being recognized. And that is very, very much in contrast to today. Don't get me wrong, I am no fool. I see what's happening in America. I see the way specifically the trans community is being scapegoated, but I still genuinely believe that it is better to grow up today being queer than it was 10 years ago, and certainly than it was 40 years ago. Wow, I can't believe 85 was that long ago. I believe with each generation here in America, we have made being queer and growing up queer easier for the next generation, and that gives me great hope because change takes time. I wish it didn't, but it does. And the way I see queerness celebrated today is so different. I even just think about the media I'm able to watch today. I've been on a rewatch of Schitt's Creek and very much enjoying that because there's so much queer representation. I've talked about the queer representation in my life as a younger person. Pretty much my only queer representation in the media I consumed was America's Next Top Model. And I just think of like all the places I look and I see queer representation, whether it's imperfect perfect or great or whatever. It is such a stride forward from what I had as a child. We are moving forward, and I don't want to say this to say that there are not things to fear. Of course, I fear gay marriage being overturned. Most importantly, I fear for the trans part of my community. They have been scapegoated, kind of the boogeyman at the moment by the Republican Party, and it's really disheartening and like genuinely downright scary for so many people. It also seems with the affordability crisis, more people are seeing through the scapegoatedness of making trans people the enemy. And then just across the board, besides that, consistently when Americans are polled, a majority support queer people and queer rights. And that is different from when I was growing up. That was not a majority when I was growing up. When I was growing up, I had no marriage to look forward to. I just had less than what people have today. And I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's great, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be vigilant, because absolutely right now we need to be vigilant about defending our rights. But I also don't think even, I was gonna say 10 years ago, but I would say 15 years ago, I would have felt comfortable being out at my job, and now we have pride events. I just want to say that there has been movement, there has been change, and while everything's not perfect, we have absolutely made progress, and I believe we will continue to make progress. And what's happening right now in America is like kind of a backstep / death knell of, I don't want to say homophobia, because I think as long as Puritanism is really alive and well in America, and racism is too, I think there will always be homophobia inherently. But I do think we're moving to a world where there's less and less acceptable homophobia, where it is easier for queer kids to find representation in people who are like them. Because like the biggest thing that I wish for, and what I say every year, my gay agenda of the like quote unquote gay agenda, I don't have an agenda. I want kids to be who they are. I want them to be comfortable to be who they are. Whether that's straight, whether that's gay, I don't really care. I just want them to feel like they can talk to the adults in their life about who they are, and not feel like they have to hide themselves the way I did as a kid to be able to have the community that was around me at the time. If I had come out at that point in time when I knew, which was probably around 5th grade, I would have lost everything. And I think that is becoming less and less true for a majority of Americans. Again, we need to be vigilant. We need to be out there continuing to have these discussions and, again, defending rights, which brings me to my, I guess, last little hope thing before we end. So my company, as part of my benefits, I get donation matches. So every year I do a little fundraiser for Point of Pride, which helps support gender affirming care for trans individuals. I feel particularly passionate about the T and the LGBTQ for so many reasons. I have obviously friends that are, but also I know that they are the most persecuted among us, and we need to be on our front lines defending them always. So I find it particularly important to fundraise for them. So you can go over to my Ko-fi, you can send me money there, and you just mark it Point of Pride. And then usually would say at the end of the month, I will then match the donation through my Works program, and I'll post a receipt back on Ko-fi for anybody who wants to see how much we raise. It's something I look forward to every year. Every year so far, we've raised more money than the year past. It's a great way to use my benefits and my privilege to exponentially add money to that pot for trans people who just do not have the financial ability to be who they are and get access to the care that they deserve. Speaking about another thing, right, that has changed in the past, like I very much remember the time that trans healthcare would have not been covered by insurance, and now it is. Like there's just been so many strides, and I feel so hopeful, and I think it is important to give back to a community that has given so much to me, because trans individuals were very much at the forefront of the fight for our rights. So it is important, again, that we protect them and we support them. But with that, reminder, I will be off next week, and then I will be back for one more sewing project before I take July off. Happy Pride. I hope you all have a safe and fun time out there. I know I will. And as always, you can support me by giving this a thumbs up and commenting down below. And of course, if you're still here, definitely subscribe. I'd love to have you stick around. I post almost every Friday. Again, I am taking next Friday off before being off for a month. So it does seem like I don't post much if you subscribe right now or I'm new to you. But I do post, like I said, fairly often, and I will see you in a couple weeks for a very fun final sewing project in my current space before I move. Bye!